Hello, 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 and welcome to The Long Road Podcast. The journey goes ever on with The Long Road, brought to you by Artisan Creative. This episode, Beignet Breakdown, Deep Fried Delights. We're back after a little break. Dive straight back into the action with our recipe of the month, New Orleans' beloved beignets. And stay tuned for a fun-filled donut quiz. Follow Kev's journey on the Camino trail in Kev's Café corner, take a trip down memory lane with the Bishop's Daily Bread, and uncover the story behind a band favourite song, Sally in Blue Flames, in Steve's Story of the Song. It's a flavourful mix of taste, trail, memory and melody you won't want to miss. The Long Road Podcast, where authenticity meets adventure. Join Steve Bonham, Kev Moore and me, Chris the Bishop Leiden, from the renegade Americana band The Long Road, as we defy stereotypes with our very own brand of quirkiness and rebellion, shaking off the stereotypes of sex, drugs and suffering. Get ready for ridiculous tales, offbeat musings and downright daft moments. Tune in for laughs, tunes and a rebellious spirit. Hop on the wild ride with The Long Road Podcast from Artisan Creative. Greetings! I am Chris the Bishop Leiden. Boy, oh boy, it's been a little while since we last pumped out a podcast, but we're back. I'm going to try and keep on pumping them out this year. So, thanks for joining us on the journey once again. There's been too much happening since our last show to fill in all the gaps, but if you want to check it out, look at our social media, I guess is the best place. See all the things we've been getting up to. I suppose the main thing to talk about is what's happening now. We have some music coming out. Some old stuff, some new stuff, some remastered stuff, some reworked stuff that's been released before. But the current one that's just come out last week before, is Sally in Blue Flames. It's always been a band favourite, and in fact Steve is talking about it in this his segment of the show this week. But you can listen to Sally on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you get your music from, whatever streaming service you prefer. Couple of other songs out in recent weeks as well. We've had a new version of The Girl with the Rattlesnake Heart, did a new version of Moonshine Running, and just before Christmas we released a brand new song which was called Ain't Gonna Fake It, which went great guns, and still going great guns actually. So if you haven't heard or seen that one, do check it out. Ain't Going to Fake It. The video is on YouTube, or you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Music, all those places. What else has been happening in the sort of wider world of Artisan Creative? Well, Steve and I have been working on a new project, sort of stemming from his book Stumbling Over Eden, which he released a couple of years ago. And we're working on a new live show based on that, but also a new children's book taken from one of the sort of sub-stories within that book. And we're developing a new children's book and another show to go with that. The children's book is called The Spirit Dog, and we're just finalising it literally this week. It'll be out very, very soon. You can pre-order it now, and if you get your pre-orders in quick, you can still get your name in the book or the name of your nominated child. If you go to artisan-creative.com, you'll see all about it there. The book is called The Spirit Dog. Don't forget, on the Artisan Creative website, you can also find out the shop that has all kinds of other things on as well. It's got books and vinyl and CDs and merchandise and all kinds of stuff on there. Loads of music videos on YouTube that you can watch. The whole podcast repository is available online as well. Check out our band website, thelongroadband.net, and you'll find a section for the podcast on there, discography and all those things like that. If you like what we do in the band, you might consider buying us a coffee. If you go to buymeacoffee.com/thelongroadband, you can do that. If you want to support all things Artisan Creative, why not join our Patreon? Go to patreon.com/artisancreative. But now, without further ado, on to the first segment of today's podcast, which is the three-way chat between me, Steve and Kev. On with the show. Hello, here we are again. The three of us are back together for another episode after a little gap of I was wondering, wait out. Is it 2 years?
It's coming on for 2 years. It would definitely qualify as a bit of a lie down.
Yeah.
A bit of a siesta.
Yes.
But here we are.
More than a pausette.
I thought that was an old record player.
Steve at home in Derbyshire. Say hello, Steve.
Artili hi.
Right. Oh, yes, we do it in different languages. I've forgotten about that. Right. Say it again.
Artili hi.
Any ideas what that is, Kev?
Something to do with tea leaf, so I'm thinking probably old age Ceylon.
Don't know, Steve. You have to tell us.
Close.
It sounds a bit Polynesian to me.
Well, very, very, very good. Yes, it's Eskimo.
Oh, very good.
Eskimo. Right.
Or
okay.
Inuit.
And say it again. Artili Ha, was it?
Artili hi.
Artili Ha, right. And we've got Kev at home in Spain. Kev, hello.
I'll have to stay local for the first one back, so it's buenas tardes, mi amigos.
Yeehaw. And there's me, the Bishop. I'm at home in Manchester. And here we are, joined together, digitally over Zoom, to talk our little bit of nonsense for the next 15 minutes of our lives and see if you, glorious listeners out there, enjoy it as well. Now, we've had a bit of time to think, I suppose, haven't we, in this little gap, when we haven't been doing the podcast regularly. And we've decided to come up with a bit of a format for the content that we're doing. So we're going to have sort of a recurring segments, I suppose, that will crop up in our three-way chats. We're going to try and do some chats with some of our friends and colleagues in the music industry, in the art industry. We're going to try and do some investigations into the world that we live in. More on that later on. Next week, you'll hear us talking about the Band of the Month, we've decided to call it, where we listen to some people's music and talk about it. But we're going to start off this week with our... Are we calling this segment Recipe of the Month? I guess.
I suppose so, yeah.
I guess we are. So Recipe of the Month.
Having looked at my offering, I'd probably call it something else, but we'll see.
And our Recipe of the Month, we decided to sort of go with sort of in the roots of us, in as much as you two have both been to the place where these things come from. I haven't been, but I've heard about them. And I would like to go, but have yet to be. So the Recipe of the Month this month, I shall announce it, sort of TV show style. This month's recipe is... Now, what did we call it in the book? We wrote it in a book. They're called beignets. Beignets. Yeah. Irresistible, delicious beignets, or something we rather sillily called them. A beignet, essentially, a donut.
Well, is it a donut, Bishop? I mean, you are the chef de band. The chef. Is it a donut, or is it actually a friteur?
A friteur.
Well, yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think you could put forward the case for the fact that it is a friteur donut hybrid. Mine was.
Here's what we've done, listeners. We've all got the same recipe, me and Steve and Kev, and we've all tried to make this recipe, and we'll just go through it bit by bit and see what our experience was. Now, I should say straight away, this recipe for delicious irresistible beignets, or whatever we called it, was taken from the programme that me and Steve made for our Edinburgh show last year, which was How to Survive Fly Impossible with the Piano, and we made a programme which had a few things in to do with well-being. One of the things we did was a recipe page, which had these beignets in. Now, what we hadn't really admitted to, not for any particular reason, just because it wasn't supposed to, was that Steve had asked ChatGPT to generate this recipe. So, and then he promptly went on holiday, leaving me with this page of instructions from ChatGPT to then work them into a recipe that would actually go to this program. Now, unfortunately, we were so running out of time, we didn't actually get time to test this recipe before we printed it into this program. But now we've tried it, and we've discovered that perhaps ChatGPT didn't know all it needed to know about beignets before it gave us a recipe for it. But I mean, my overall experience was they were okay.
Yeah, they were okay.
I've learned something from my attempt.
What did you learn, Kev?
That I should probably have the pan on a lower heat and do the beignet for longer, because I did find that there was some, shall we say, uncooked dough within the beignet as a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, I might have cooked mine a little too long thinking about it, because actually some of my insides, I mean, they were absolutely fine, but the insides were definitely done. Put it that way.
I had to deal with the fact that I couldn't find any baking soda, so I used bicarb, which I do know you use less of than baking soda, so
right.
that worked. And I had, of course, here, very hard to get fresh milk. I had to use UHT.
Oh.
Oh God, I've never even thought. I mean, that was one of the things I was going to ask: is what I mean, none of us have made the actual recipe because we've all used variations. So Kev, you couldn't use real milk, and you had to swap out baking powder for bicarb.
But they were still very tasty.
Steve, what was?
I couldn't find any nutmeg. It's not Christmas in England at the moment, so
Yes.
cinnamon, which I thought would be an honourable substitute, and it actually was.
Yeah, I did the same. And that
Yeah, so
worked.
I don't think any of us used nutmeg. I think we all used cinnamon instead.
Yeah.
My experience of beignets, never having been to New Orleans, where I think you guys have experienced beignets.
Yeah.
I've only seen them online. I've seen people. I think Kev, you talked about them in one of the previous podcasts.
I did, because I went to the
Café
Beignet Café in New Orleans, which is an incredible place. I mean, they're just world standard beignets there.
Yeah. And I think those would have been a beignet. Presumably they're made with yeast, more like an actual sort of bread product.
From what I remember, they felt and tasted certainly lighter than mine.
Lighter, yeah. Because certainly for me, like this recipe that we had, flour and water and baking powder, and not water, flour and milk and sugar and eggs. The bit where ChatGPT went haywire was...
I need to talk about instruction 5.
Yes, step 5
Yes.
may or may not have been advisable if you took it very literally.
I am still cleaning the dough out of the dog's head. Off the dog's head.
So
try to roll something that's basically liquid is quite tricky.
I mean, I don't know what a non-Newtonian fluid is, but this sometimes felt like it was it. Didn't always behave the same way you're expecting. And I think, and maybe most people think of a beignet, they would think of a firmer dough that would be more like something you can roll out.
Yeah.
You'd roll it out and you'd cut it into little squares or whatever, and then you'd let them rise for a bit probably, and then drop them into the hot oil. Whereas this, as we discovered, comes to step 5. Once you'd mixed the liquid in, it was like, we're not rolling this out, are we? This is definitely a pouring situation.
Well, in a rare moment of dutifulness, I did attempt that. And it squidged over the edge of the bench, and Harry the dog caught it flat on top of his head.
There we go.
I didn't cook that bit.
So you literally made a dog's breakfast as well then?
Oh yeah, dog's breakfast of it. Yeah, it was right on.
After we got over the trauma of step 5 being a lie, presumably we each ended up just dropping it in with a spoon into the hot oil, which is always a slightly terrifying moment. I think anything involving hot oil just slightly terrifying.
And of course, I don't know. I don't know what 190 degrees is. Looking at a pan of oil, it doesn't tell me anything. It's just oil.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just oil, So I'm like, okay, it's moving a bit. I guess that's hot.
I mean, I've got a thermometer, so I shoved a thermometer in it, and it got me to to a temperature. What did people do before we had thermometers?
No idea.
Guess.
Stick your finger in.
Stick your finger in. If it goes down to the bone, it's hot enough.
Yes.
That's what they had servants for in the old days.
Yes. God.
I suppose some people, they might have suggested take a little bit of the dough or whatever and drop it in and see what happens.
It's exactly what I did.
Oh, that's very forward thinking.
That was the ghost of my mother saying, "This is what you do."
And I don't know what happened to you guys, but for mine basically turned into not perfect spheres, but they became very spherical.
Oh, mine didn't.
Oh, right.
They were a bit more patty-like, really. Very tasty, gotta say, very tasty.
We can put pictures of them on the follow-up, can't we?
Yeah, I mean, mine were quite big in the end.
Can you imagine somebody coming halfway into this podcast?
Mine was on the size of large tomatoes. Is that normal? They were darker than usual.
That would be the hot oil, Chris.
So I should get somebody else to dangle him in before. Yes, okay. And then texturally, for your finished products, how did they turn out? Were you pleased with them?
Yes, yeah. I was the ones that didn't have the uncooked dough in the middle. I found them nice. I thought you're just a brilliant compliment to a cup of coffee.
I did love the discovery, because every day it has a new insight. It is the state donut of Louisiana.
Oh.
Yeah, that gave it a sort of profundity that I wasn't expecting.
Yes.
A need for reverence, and probably taking a little more care over it next time.
do they actually term it the state donut?
Yeah.
So a beignet, by that yardstick, is a donut then.
Yeah. There's only 2 states have donuts,
Right.
and I can't for the life of remember the other state that does.
Right. This is the level of research that we go to on the Long Road podcast. We remember some things, and then we forget.
We do it
some
so
other
you
things.
don't have to, ladies and gentlemen.
Let me look up state donuts. How are you spelling donut? American way.
DON.
State donuts. Well, now here's an interesting. We can do a little quiz on this, can't we? You said there was only one. Is that true?
Two. Oh, there's one other.
Yeah, one other. Yes. Here it is. I mean, there is a famous donut that we probably are all aware of, and that will give us the answer to which other state it is. The donut itself is named after a city in this state, and it's a something cream pie.
Oh, is it Kentucky?
No.
Texas?
No. I mean, we're just guessing. So it's a Boston cream pie.
Boston cream.
And of course, the state of Boston is
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yes. So that's the. I'm fascinated now. I've opened up the Wikipedia page on US state foods, and that very well might be my afternoon dealt with. That I might just be looking through that and saying, well, we'll make that,
Coincidental that you need a Massachusetts to eat a donut.
Hey! Massachusetts. So if we had to give the beignets, I've decided we're going to give the recipes of the month a score out of 10.
Okay.
Not for any league table or anything. With our own caveats and our own decisions, what would we each give the beignets that we made out of 10? Steve, let's start with you.
7.
7?
7,
Healthy?
yes. Yeah, it wasn't disappointing. And it's actually, the beauty of it was it did not, apart from the incident with the dog, it was relatively straightforward to make.
And actually took far less time than I thought.
Yes. Oh, yeah, they're quite quick, yeah.
Kev?
I also arrive at 7. 1 is deducted from the perfect 10 for the chaos with the do you roll them in dough or not, in flour or not.
Yeah.
And 2 for my incompetence. So I fully expect to approach a 9 if I did them again. So a creditable 7. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not to jump on a bandwagon here, but I think I would probably go with a 7 as well, because they were fine, but they weren't what I was hoping for, really.
Yeah.
And I suppose part of that is literally my own fault, because I edited the recipe and it got to where it got to. But maybe next time we choose a recipe, we don't choose one that ChatGPT has invented for us.
Okay, guys, Sally and Blue Flames. It's in A. Sally and Blue Flames there, flirting with the guys and singing them bad old songs. All goes wrong, I could take myself way back there. Through those rushing doors where they slip on the floor. You keep the boots on the bed to make a pillow for your head. Then she takes you dancing to the rhythm of that long, long smile. Rhythm of the long night. Freedom runs like a lock out in the rain, looking for attention on that southbound train. A dead man dying, Lord, I saw his soul flying back to you. Where the bones of the old ones lie, where the fire river flows and the moonshine calls her name. Oh, Sally, Sally, Sally. I started to write Sally back in a little old terraced house I was living in a few years ago. What was odd about it was those initial chords, they're so straightforward, you know, G and D and E minor and stuff. And normally I start with the quirky or
mad bit and I would work back to normality with my songwriting. But this one started in a normal place, 3 most common chords in Americana, folk and whatever. But yeah, I kept playing them and I kept putting them down till eventually I wrote the song. I don't know why, but it just seemed to come out of nowhere and fitted wherever I was at the time. The subject of the song is something I've always been kind of intrigued with, the idea of what do outlaws do when they grow old. I remember a film when I was younger, Robin and Marianne, I think it was. Sean Connery and maybe it was Audrey Hepburn or Catherine, well, one of them anyway. Towards the end of their lives, you know, a bit feisty, a bit sparky, but still connected in some deep way, even though they both found the other completely unlivable with. And there you have it. There was Sally. All I remember most about recording it, because it was one of the first things Chris and I ever did with Big Kev, was just the sheer joy of that bass slide into the final bit. Absolutely marvellous. Anyway, always loved this song. Here it is in full.
Always be Sally in blue flames there, flirting with the guys and singing them bad old songs. It all went wrong, I take myself way back there, through the rough swing doors where they spit on the floor. You keep your boots on in bed, you make a pillow for your head, then she takes you dancing to the rhythm of the long and lonesome night. The rhythm of the lonesome night. Deep in the canyon where the bones of the old ones lie, where the fiery river flows and the moonshine calls a name. Up in the air, the old crow sees it all. He's a mean old bird, he's forgotten every word of the promises I broke, which all went up in smoke when I took my chance of running way out across the borderline. Way out across the borderline. Oh Sally, these dreams are growing old. Oh Sally, my freedom has been sold. My hope rusts like a lock out in the rain, looking for redemption on that southbound train, but I lie in chains. I lie in chains. Sally in blue flames there, she's a handsome girl, spy the lines across her face. One thing I know, she won't talk of me no more, but sometimes in the night when she turns out the light, I hope she can recall in the days before the fall, when she took me dancing through the rhythm of the long and lonesome night. Of the lonesome night. Oh Sally, dreams are growing old. Oh Sally, freedom has been sold. My hope rusts like a lock out in the rain, looking for redemption
Cafe Corner. Well, it seems like I've been stuck in limbo somewhere on the Camino for 2 years. So for those of you that join us anew, a brief recap. Going stir crazy during the pandemic, I decided to take myself off and walk the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. In my case, that involved a 650-kilometre trip from Santander. I'd begun on October the 3rd, 2020, following the Atlantic coast and carrying 21-kilo rucksack for company. It's been the most incredible journey so far, and if you haven't already done so, I urge you to listen to earlier episodes of our podcast where you'll find me describing the walk thus far. But now I'm going to take you back to that time. I'm 23 days into the walk, and I've befriended 3 Germans, Tim and Alyssa from Dortmund, and Clemens, a remarkable 18-year-old guy who, starting his journey in June, had actually walked from Munster. I was in the village of Alagoa, and as Monday, October the 26th dawned, we all decided we'd walk together to Sobrado, which was 27.5 kilometres away. We awoke to a great breakfast spread in the common room and left the albergue around 8:30 a.m. And the day proved to be a tough one, a lot of gradients, off-road walking and rain. Lots of rain. Also, there was nowhere to find food or drink until about 5 kilometres before our destination. We did have one brief stop in a bus shelter to have water and some breakfast stuff that we'd liberated from the albergue. What surprised and delighted me was my ability to match these kids for pace. Tim particularly seemed to struggle with pain in his feet and was on painkillers, and they'd only walked from Asturias Airport. Eventually, we found a cafe bar and a familiar dog was huddled in the doorway, sheltering from the driving rain. Lily. For those of you familiar with the earlier instalments of my journey will remember that Lily tended to pop up every now and again. We all trooped eagerly into the cafe with our backpacks and ponchos, glad to be in the warm, water pooling on the ground around us. I ordered a coffee, and it was so close to how I like it, I ordered a second, a rarity in Spain. You can't have too much of a good thing. They had no hot food to speak of, but they did warm up a bacon and cheese empanada for me. After a day's walking, it was most welcome. So we pushed on for the final 5 kilometres to Sobrano and checked into the hostel for a very reasonable €8. We found we were reunited with our budding Spanish chef, a guy we'd encountered at a previous hostel a couple of days ago who'd cooked for a few of the pilgrims. He asked if I'd like a 2-course dinner tonight, and having only had the empanada all day, I readily agreed. I began to hang up my everything, over my bunk and made a coffee. That evening proved to be a special one on the Camino. There were around 12 of us for dinner. A makeshift dining room was created in the hallway, and old newspapers served as tablecloths. We'd all pitched in a couple of euros each, and our chef had worked his magic. We were served a meal of chicken, potato, and onion broth, followed by pasta, fried egg and ham that he'd somehow created in the tiniest of kitchens. The camaraderie between a dozen total strangers was palpable, a shared moment, literally breaking bread together, a connection to the most primal acts of friendship since the dawn of time. My dining table alone was occupied by me, a Pole, a Dutchman and a German. I hadn't thought such a gathering would be possible during the pandemic and so late in the year, pilgrims being in short supply. I went to bed that night happy that I'd experienced that side of the Camino, the befriending of strangers, the sharing of a meal. It was joyous. How easily we take such things for granted. Next time, alone again, naturally.
So it's been a little while since we've had a Bishop's Daily Bread segment. I've probably had very many adventures in the kitchen since we last spoke, some of which would have been spectacular fails and some of which would have been fabulously successful. In fact, yes, as I said here now, I can think of a bunch of things that I'll talk about in due course. But the topic of my little segment on the podcast today is nostalgia. I constantly think about how my food interests are powered by nostalgia and the search for dishes from my childhood, or just growing up in general, that take me back to a certain time and a certain place. I've probably spoken about a bunch of them on here before. Today's Bishop's Daily Bread on this nostalgia trip is a cornflake tart with custard. Now, I talked about this with a friend of mine just the other day, and he asked, have you been baking anything recently? And I said, well, I've made a cornflake tart recently. I mean, truth be told, I've probably made many cornflake tarts over the last few months. Anyway, but I had made a cornflake tart that day. And he was like, he'd never come across one. So, and I was like, is it not part of your sort of primary school makeup, having cornflake tarts? And he was like, no. Well, so here we go. So for the uninitiated of you, uninitiated, that's a fun word to say, isn't it? Uninitiated. For you lot, what is a cornflake tart? Well, cornflake tart is a short crust pastry case. It's a good job I've maintained my ability to speak English in the years since our last podcast. A short crust pastry case, the bottom of which is lined with a cheap jam, probably a raspberry, definitely unseeded. And then on top of this, so you cook the pastry base, you blind bake the pastry case, spread the jam on a sort of thin layer, well, thin depending on your given value of thin, I suppose. And then on top of the jam goes the cornflake mixture, for which you heat up some butter and golden syrup and a bit of brown sugar, a little pinch of salt, and maybe some vanilla as well. Warm that through till the butter melts and the sugar dissolves into the liquid and golden syrup, and then you throw in what looks like far too many cornflakes you could possibly imagine mixing into this relatively small pool of liquid at the bottom here. But it all works. You get them coated, spin it around a bit, and then plonk on top of your jam, spread it out a bit. And once it's evened out, you pop it all in the oven for just 5 minutes or so it sort of just solidifies it a little bit, and then take it out. And most of the recipes I've seen have been quite specific on this point, that you should eat it warm with custard. And of course, me being me, I will, more often than not, go to the hassle of making fresh custard. Although actually it's not that much of a hassle. A few egg yolks, milk and cream, blah, blah, blah. Stirry, heaty. You get this custard at the end. But then, of course, you're left with egg whites left over. It's like, oh, now I've got to, it's the law. I have to make meringues with these. And then I end up eating meringues for a week. But that's how it goes. But warm cornflake tart with custard is one of those puddings that I suppose these days we'd call it top tier. And I suppose when I think about it, the cornflake tart takes me back to that time being in primary school. And the dinner ladies in primary school, nearly all of the dinner ladies serving food were really nice, lovely, delightful. A couple of the dinner ladies on duty in the playground may not have been quite so delightful. But that was almost de rigueur for a dinner lady in the late 80s. And these food trips down memory lane, my nostalgia brain, I think about how it crosses over into music and how much nostalgia fuels what I play in my sort of day-to-day playing. So a lot of my time since our last podcast I've spent playing in hospitals, in public spaces, on wards, in sort of canteens, all those kind of things, all around, in Manchester, in Derby, Nottingham, Burton, Cheshire, all kinds of places, meeting loads and loads of brilliant people, patients, staff, visitors, and just about everything I play. I'm doing just solo piano. I call it jazz, but it's sort of almost too big a word for it. Really, it's just classic charts, really. Anywhere from the sort of 1920s, really, 1920s through to the 60s. It's rare I'll play anything from the 70s, even rarer the 80s or anything modern. No, mostly 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Plenty of them are from musicals, classic musicals, but not all of them. Some of them are written for just the popular music release, I suppose. Nearly always the reason I play them is that they are exquisitely crafted. These people knew what they were doing back then, how to write a song, and how to make a song that would stick. Kicking in from music memories from our village pantomime growing up. or perhaps from The Muppet Show. I think those two are the sources. I could probably literally go through all the charts I play, and I could probably attribute either the pantomime or the Muppet Show, or in fact both, to why I know that particular song. Maybe I'll do that one day as a bit of a fun exercise to see how many actually there are. And the ones that aren't directly from those sort of sources are fueled by this sort of adjacent feeling of nostalgia from a world where this music leads you on a little journey and it's comforting. You know where it's going. There's a few surprises, but nothing too terrifying. It's not trying to shock you. They just want to wrap you up in this little world they make for a few minutes, and they know exactly how to do it. And just a quick little story to finish with my link from nostalgia and food to link in nostalgia and music. I was fortunate enough a few weeks ago in one of my hospital sessions. I was playing on a ward, which was mostly filled with older people. I was playing along, and this lady, Marjorie, we'll call her, she shuffled past on her walking frame with a member of staff up again, and she sort of leant into me conspiratorially, and she sang along. She knew the words. Which one was it? Oh yes, it was I Left My Heart in San Francisco. She had this big grin on her face, and she was thrilled. I was thrilled. A fellow traveller, brilliant, and she shuffled past again later on. I was playing a different chart. I can't remember what it was the second time around, but again she leant in and sang along, thrilled to have something that she was singing along to. And a member of staff pulled up an empty chair to put next to me and brought Marjorie over, and she came and sat there, and she said to me, "Oh, I won't be able to remember any of them." I said, "It doesn't matter, just listen or sing, join in, whatever you want to do. No pressure at all." So I tried to pick some things that she might remember, she might know, mostly songs from like 30s, 40s, 50s. And then for the next 20 or 30 minutes, the rest of my session playing that day, me and Marjorie, we were in our own little universe. Nostalgia for both of us in our own ways, and time travelling. And I think that for me, certainly for me, maybe for Marjorie as well, the rest of the world sort of melted away for those 20 minutes, those 30 minutes. We were just existing together, playing this gloriously exquisite music. Marjorie surprising herself with how much she could remember. She was absolutely bang on key all the time as well. And the ripple effect of that going across the wards, you know, some of the staff who may be less inclined to enjoy music on the wards, you could see them stop and pause and look over and just have that look go over their face, and I think, maybe we've made some inroads there. And plenty of the staff just thrilled, you know, clapping and joining in and just amazed, just thrilled. And one of the staff members that comes up and pats Marjorie on the shoulder, almost sort of unable to speak. They're so moved by the moment. So that session of nostalgia for both of us was a beautiful, beautiful moment. It might just be that I managed to provide Marjorie with her long-lost slice of cornflake tart with custard. I often don't have a strong, well-thought-out point to make with my Bishop's Daily Bread segments, but perhaps today is enjoy the things you enjoy, wallow in them occasionally, and share them with a friend. Until next time. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening, wherever in the world you are. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, however you get your podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Acast, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon. The next episode will be out next Friday, all being well. If you fancy buying us a coffee, you can at buymeacoffee.com/thelongroadband. Dead simple to just drop us a few quid to support what we do. It even accepts Apple Pay and Google Pay. Super easy. All of our band's music and merch is on Bandcamp, where you can help support a positive ecosystem for the music industry. Download, streaming, vinyl, CDs, it's all there. Go to thelongroadband.bandcamp.com. You can get hold of our books through the Artisan Creative website. Head to artisan-creative.com. We're also on Patreon at patreon.com/artisancreative. Big thank you to our current Patreons for your ongoing support. If you'd like to support us, you'll get free digital stuff and merchandise in the post if you want it. Help us create something different, something that entertains, and something that inspires others. Join us on the journey, patreon.com/artisancreative. Thank you once again, brave adventurers, vagabonds and explorers, for joining us on the long road. Remember, the world isn't beige, it's authentic, it's rich and it's real. Embrace every last bit of it. Until next time, the journey goes ever on with the long road. Bye for now.